authoritarian regimes, there is always democratic light. There are always citizens, activists, and pro-democracy leaders advocating for and securing change at the ballot box while working daily to secure better lives for their fellow citizens. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, two countries moved towards and have since consolidated their homegrown democracy, and they were both in Africa, Malawi and Zambia. This show will explore what strategies have proved to be the most effective for opposition movements, including in some of the countries I just mentioned, namely Zambia, Senegal, and the Gambia. We have also invited speakers from countries like Nigeria and Uganda to discuss grassroots organizing, citizen mobilization, and what goes into building an upstart campaign in the 21st century. Winning against the odds may mean capturing the presidency, but it can also mean securing a seat as a member of parliament to represent your constituency. Together, we will learn how to outmaneuver authoritarian tactics and obstacles from leaders on the front lines with a track record of success. In order to achieve these aims, we also rely on you, our audience, to contribute to the discussion by posting your questions and comments on our various platforms on YouTube, Facebook, and on Twitter. We also hope that you send us your questions via WhatsApp, the number of which should be on your screen right now. Co-hosting with me today is my colleague, Mentate Mloshwa. How are you feeling today, my friend?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I am great. And could you remind everyone what the Resistance Bureau is all about and introduce our speakers for today?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Jeff. As a way of refreshing everyone's memory, the Resistance Bureau is a platform that was founded with the intent to focus on the major threats to human rights and democracy in Africa as well as worldwide, while shining a light on the leaders who remain at the forefront of the struggle for freedom and human dignity. We're pleased that today's show will feature some outstanding experts who will no doubt help us to better understand and unpack today's topic. First, we have with us Chipokota Monawasa, a Zambian lawyer, published author, and most importantly, for today's conversation, policy advisor to the current president of Zambia, Hakainde Hichilema, who played a critical role in a successful 2021 election campaign against an increasingly authoritarian incumbent. We also have Aisha Dabo, a Senegalese and Gambian human rights expert who's the founder and coordinator of the Africtivist, a Pan-African organization that unites bloggers, web activists, and changemakers across Francophone Africa. She has coordinated a number of pro-democracy campaigns, and most recently in Senegal. We're also likely to be joined by Oluchi E, a Nigerian human rights advocate and grassroots organizer. In last year's Nigerian election, Oluchi was a key volunteer for the Labour Party campaign, supporting its presidential candidate, Peter Obi, whose innovative platform broke through the dominance of the APC and PDP to make the country a three-party system. Rounding out our featured speakers today is Honorable Derek Nyeko, a member of the Parliament of Uganda who serves as the Shadow Minister for Defense and Veteran Affairs in the National Unity Platform, the country's most popular opposition party, led by Bobi Wine. And last but certainly not least, our colleague Nick Chisman is joining us as a special co-host and discussant. As many of you know, Nick has published extensively on these issues and has worked across the continent on elections and pro-democracy mobilization. He will come in at the end of the panel conversation for a brief discussion, as well as to curate our Q&A. We have a lot of ground to cover in a very limited amount of time, so we do ask our speakers to keep their submissions relatively short. This is because doing so will leave us ample time for questions from our audience. With all of this said, Jeff, back over to you to kickstart today's discussion.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mentate. Aisha, I would love to start with you because you really had your finger on the pulse of citizens and voters in Senegal. I remember having several conversations with you in the lead up to and during the elections, and I wanted to ask you, what were the main factors that led to such a resounding defeat there for the political status quo? And secondly, how did now President Faye and his colleague Usman Sonko manage to mobilize support when they were in jail for much of the campaign period? Would love your thoughts on those two issues.
Thank you, Jeffrey Matlante, for having me today. In Senegal, actually, I think I can name about seven points that contributed to the victory. The first one was public discontent with regards to the government of Macky Sall. Macky Sall was in his second term, and there was this perceived corruption, and some of them actually have been proven to be embezzlement and rampant corruption of public officials, and that while living conditions in Senegal continue to be very dire. Senegal is the most expensive. Dakar is the most expensive city to live in Africa, and Senegal is among the most expensive countries to live in the country, on the continent. Out of the first 10 countries most expensive on the continent, actually, if we consider, South Africa is 9th, and Senegal is first. So that says a lot about the difficult living conditions people were in. That brings the second point, which is economic concern, because there's this perception, and sometimes even proven, that the economy is controlled by non-Senegalese, and also the fact that there's a high unemployment rate, mainly of young people, in a country where over 60% of the population, that's 18 million people, are under 25. So Pai's and his coalition's promise of, fighting corruption, of creating job opportunities, and resolving and addressing economic issues have contributed. The third point is the political and legal challenge. If you have been following Senegal since 2021, there have been serious issues, legal issues that Ousmane Sonko has had. He was in jail when the campaign started, and Faye also was even jailed just because he published a Facebook post about the making a commentary on the judiciary's handling of the Ousmane Sonko case. So this has created a huge sympathy, because there was this perception that the judiciary is being manipulated to settle political scores. So that has created sympathy among citizens, citizens in general, and for them being released just 10 days before the polls has, emboldened their supporters, but also have created more appeal, actually, from other Senegalese who are considered the silent majority of voters. Another point is the promise for political change. This is a huge one, actually, because since the 60s, there's a system, a status quo that's here, and that seems to continue to impoverish the masses, while there's an elite, including politicians, who keep on getting rich. So the promise that they've made, Faye, Sonko, and their team, is to change that by bringing in equal distribution of wealth, by making sure that foreign influence in Senegal actually is limited or controlled, because based on the Frank Tifa rules, over 200 companies, actually, private sector companies, French companies who are in the country, do not pay taxes in Senegal. They have to pay it in France, so to avoid double taxation. Another point actually is, the youth influence, because from the onset, the creation of this political party, there were young people, and most of the supporters actually are young people. It doesn't mean that the other age groups are not present, but this has, created a huge sympathy for the political party. And also, there's this thing about Senegal where there's time to fight, people fight, and when there's time to vote, people go peacefully to the polling stations and vote. So that's happened, and people, did everything to make sure that the polls or the voting process were not tampered with, and that's something that's very, very important. And based on thanks to the system that Senegal has, actually, the way the polls are counted is very transparent. And if you have enough representatives in the polling stations from political parties, also that's something that helps. Also, another, and this will be my last one, is the growing sentiment, and this is not just unique to Senegal. Actually, we've seen it across the continent. Is this sentiment of prioritizing Senegalese needs, addressing Senegalese aspirations and realities, instead of just focusing on what's happening on the international scene, or trying to play based on the books of one superpower or the other. So though a mixture of all these actually has led to the opposition winning the polls.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I think I love the fact that you mentioned, the youth influence. I think when we speak about Zambia, a lot of times we talk about what role young people played in the 2021 election. But I also like the last thing that you mentioned when you're speaking about just the growing sentiment towards prioritizing and addressing the needs and realities of the local, where in my mind, that's already building the value of the vote for an ordinary person. When they stand up to go and vote, they already understand what they're voting for. So thank you so much, for those important insights that you've given us on Senegal. We also know that you're involved in the process in Gambia back in December 2016, which led to the defeat of the long-reigning dictator Yahya Jammeh. To your mind, what were the key lessons learned in Gambia? And importantly, can they be implemented elsewhere?
I think I'm from an organization, Africtivist, that creates approaches and projects that are open source and that can be replicated in any country, and they have to be adapted to the context of a country to be implemented. The realities are different, but there's some points that I want to highlight, that have to be contextualized, but they can help opposition groups to win. In the Gambia, it's the fact that with a system that was controlled by Yahya Jammeh, the then dictator, it was very difficult to win the elections. So having just one candidate, through opposition unity, has helped actually consolidate the sentiment, the anti-Jammeh sentiment, in a nutshell. The opposition's unity, putting differences aside and focusing on, change, that's very important. It's a decision that's most of the time very difficult to be made by political parties, but every time that coalitions have happened, we've seen change happen. The second point is the legal integrity. And here I'm talking about the fact that the Independent Electoral Commission played a huge role actually in making sure that the results of the polls were the ones that were being published, even though there was a long hiatus of several hours while negotiations were going on for the results to be announced. There was a complete internet blackout, and it was difficult to get the result out. But we, as an organization, collaborated with other civil society organizations in Senegal and the Gambia to be able to get the result out, because I traveled to attend, to be there during the election. So luckily, we were able to get the results out on time, and that has prevented actually any manipulation of possible outcomes. Another point is international cooperation and diaspora involvement. The Gambian diaspora, and in this case, actually, the Senegalese diaspora in the most recent case, have played a huge role in mobilizing the world. They've hold protests whenever the head of state traveled. They've used all legal means internationally available to, sue the then government in the Gambia for human rights abuse. There are several briefings before the various embassies that exist within the region. And for the Gambia, it was foreign embassies in Senegal. They were able to have several events that were held in Senegal to raise awareness about what's happening in the Gambia and how serious actually the situation was. And the last one we launched as an organization was Jammeh Fact. It was just documenting from 1994 to 2016 all the human rights abuses that the Jammeh government has committed. And the international cooperation is very important for opposition, civil society organization, and any non-state or body working on governance or democracy to be able to have this relationship of briefing commission, where you have civil society organization have the possibility actually of briefing the commission on what's happening regarding human rights in the country. These are instruments, specifically African instruments. They're existing African instruments that can be used, to put the country out there so that people will know what's happening. And the diaspora actually always plays a big role in terms of funding, mobilizing a lot of resources and funding, and being able also to for those who have modern, who are, for instance, American citizens and Senegalese citizens, they brief their senators. That's also an approach to get the issue before the Senate in the US. And another important one is peaceful advocacy. This is very difficult in some countries, specifically when you have dictators, actually, to be able to have that peaceful, approach. But it's something that's possible, because in the Gambia, I don't think, from what I know in history, I've never seen a dictator being removed by the polls, but it was able, it happened, and it was in the Gambia. Specifically in the Gambia, we had the Kalama revolution that was led by women. It's the Calabash revolution, and women actually said enough, and they were out there, they were raising awareness. And here I want to mention civic education programs being by civil society organization, opposition parties. This is a constant, it's all hands on deck actually to make it happen. And the other thing also, just to show how peaceful advocacy can help, is during the post-election crisis in the Gambia has rallied, bring together the whole country and, the continent and beyond, just to ask for the polls result to be upheld and for Jammeh to leave. And this also, using social media and technology, has helped also keep people informed, control the narrative, because there were also other people doing propaganda to change, saying that the West was the one behind the whole thing. And the interesting thing in the Gambia is the West was not even interested in the elections in 2016. It's after the results came out that everyone was interested. So I'll just recall the point: unity, legal integrity, international cooperation, and the diaspora involvement, as well as peaceful advocacy.
Thank you so much, Aisha. I think what I love the most about the submission so far is the fact that you are mapping the points of pressure. It didn't happen from one place. It's just the different levels where different things had to be done by different people, and people actually recognizing their role and playing it in order to contribute to the collective effort that was needed. So thank you so much for giving us that extensive foundation. Oluchi, I want to bring you into the conversation now. So history shows us that not all opposition campaigns are initially successful. They face numerous obstacles, including biased courts and electoral commissions. The Obi campaign, of which you were part, faced it all. Tell us all about that experience and what you and your colleagues have learned, and how you managed to win a number of legislative seats despite these major challenges.
Thank you, Mantati. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So, when we look at it's called the Obedient Movement, and these are people who support Peter Obi. If you look at the beginning of this movement, you'd see that Peter Obi ignited hope in a lot of Nigerians, especially Nigerian youths. He started off with, the youth mobilization, and not just him alone doing it. He also encouraged other Nigerians to get involved. We had people from all over the country for the first time getting involved in politics. We have people from the diaspora also coming down to Nigeria to help as much as they can, because they believe that grassroots mobilization and grassroots voter education was very much important. Now you're looking at a country that has had lots of presidents, not a lot, but seemingly a lot of presidents, and a lot of people are also not educated about elections and what the expectations are from a leader. Now, if you go back a little bit, you see that Nigeria had come from a military regime, and then to democracy and all that, and then all of a sudden, people are expected to vote their choices. But most times, after the election, it doesn't turn out that way. Like, the people they voted for doesn't always appear to be the winners. Not that they do not win, but there are a lot of discrepancies here and there, even all the way from the, INEC, the Electoral Commission. So now, back to Peter Obi. When Obi came into the picture, he swept everyone off their feet. For the first time, Nigerian youths who were not interested in elections because of the history of getting cheated out of the election process. When Obi came into the picture, they kind of picked up and decided to give it one more try. Obi's message resonated with a lot of youths. He talked about inclusiveness. He talked about fixing the economy, going from consumption to production, and also addressing security challenges in the country. And these are things that has been on everyone's mind, but then it seemed like the ruling class, the political class, had neglected a lot of people. So Obi saw that and took advantage of it and made sure that every Nigerian understood what was expected of them and what they should be demanding from their leaders. So that kind of tightened up the competition. Now you had other candidates who are usually all about spending money, throwing money around, throwing food around just to get votes. Now they had to work extra hard to impress things because Obi had already captured their attention. Now, when the election started, a lot of things happened, right? It wasn't just about winning the election, it was about doing the right thing. And Nigerians really, really worked hard for the election. And due to that hard work, it showed that Peter Obi won the election. He did win it, right? But then they were cheated again. But this time around, what stood out differently is that Nigerians saw, it's not just about hearing that elections were rigged and this and that, they saw it. They were they saw how it played out. They were there physically. They fought hard to protect them. But again, they were overpowered by, of course, the current ruling class. So now, thinking about what the lessons have been, I don't think people should stop. I don't think they should give up. And like you pointed out, it's not a one-time thing. Most times, oppositions win after multiple tries. But if Peter Obi is willing to continue, is willing to fight for the people, because this man is not just about running for office for himself. He's not interested in running for office so that he can enrich himself and his family like others have been doing. Obi is more about the people. He cares about people. He wants the people basically to know their rights, to fight for their rights, and to, get involved in politics, because these are things that have been missing, for a while now. So seeing the way the February 25th, 2023 election played out, one can see that there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And a few points that I think would be very, very much is still that voter education. It's not just educating people on when and how to cast a vote. We're talking about educating people about their rights. People need to understand what's expected of them as citizens and what they should expect from those who are leading them and those who are looking for votes during election season. Now, Peter Obi, I like to always bring, because I love his political style, and I always draw knowledge from everything he's doing. Looking at what has happened, you would expect that Obi would give up, right? He would give up and pack up and say, you know what, I'm done. I'm disappointed. They cheated me. It's over. But he did not do that. He is still reaching out to the people. He is still keeping in touch with the people. And he's continued to mobilize more youths, right? Because Nigeria has a large population of youths. Not that there are no older people who are supporting him, but there are lots of youths who love this man. And he's continued to be in touch with them. He continues to come up with more programs that would impress the youths. And, this is what we're in April of 2024. One should expect that everything should be done and over and wait till maybe 2027 and start all over again, but he's not giving up. So we can learn a lot from what he's currently doing. Youth mobilization is great. Voter education is important, but also making sure that his message sits well so that when it's time for another re-election, people will be ignited one more to say, you know what, let's give it another try. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oluchi, for that. We heard you talking about Peter Obi as a candidate, energizing young Nigerian voters in a way that we hadn't seen before. Your phrase, I think, is very apt, that he ignited the youth, and certainly youth beyond Nigeria. It's really interesting to see the outpouring of support really across the region in the lead up to the elections. But we also know, all of us on this call, everyone listening, that elections are not a one-off event. So what is being done, what is being done right now and moving forward to cultivate this really energetic base of supporters into a committed and sustainable voting bloc going forward that can be mobilized for future elections? We heard you talk about voter education and the ongoing mobilization efforts that are taking place, but what is concretely being done to really cultivate that very committed base of voters? Would love your thoughts on that.
Well, I can't concretely say what's being done, but I do know that there has been discussions about reforming INEC, basically, because that's where the whole problem started from. Reforming INEC and also the judiciary, because these were the two most important organizations or possibly groups that hindered or even brought up whatever we see right now happening in Nigeria. I would love for INEC to be restructured. Of course, we're not going to say let's get rid of the Electoral Commission, but it has to be restructured, and we have to also revisit the Constitution, because a lot of things in the 1999 Constitution was used to twist justice. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to use that word. It was used to twist justice because Obi's case ended up in the appeals court and also in the Supreme Court, and there were lots of lots of laws that they drew out in there that shouldn't have been used. But just not to drive away from what we're talking about, I think I do not have any, I don't know what to say right now regarding that aspect, and I hope that there's a lot of work going on in the background, but I do know that as an obedient and other obedients are currently working on, to make sure that what happened in 2023 is not going to repeat itself in 2027. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oluchi. Derek, pivoting to you right now. Thank you very much for joining us. This week in the lead up to the show, I was reading a review, one of the many online reviews of Bobi Wine, the People's President, and the Nigerian author of this article wrote in that piece, he said, "It is inconceivable that this ghetto youth has not only risen to the highest echelons of a highly militarized society, but also threatens quite convincingly to topple the dictator that rules over it." So I later tweeted this article, and the Ugandan responded to me saying that the youth population in Uganda has really been inspired to get involved in politics and occupy and run for elective positions like never before. So I wanted to ask you, assuming that this is true, because I think we have seen evidence of that, do we need to start talking more about citizens winning and perhaps avoid exclusionary titles like the opposition? In other words, do we need to rethink the entire concept and language of opposition in Uganda and other similarly situated autocracies that are ruled by one party and a highly militarized regime? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Smooth. First of all, Bobi Wine's coming to the political arena brought so many young people to get involved in the politics of the country. Well, and the slogan of people power, our power really cuts across and brings so many people to be attached to the call of the people having their rights and being in position to protect them and to stand by them. In 2021, as Bobi Wine came into and rose and went for elections, which he won, and we were not declared. We are putting all our effort to see that more of the young people can literally connect on social media, literally can get organized to see that they get more involved in their in the politics of the country, and as well to participate and run for political offices, because it is those young people that we have hope in, since most of having a leader who has been in power for over 38 years, he has infiltrated almost all political parties and all the elders of our country. So we are looking at family using the people power and spreading the information more to the young people so that they can defend their vote. We are looking at an election we are going to whereby we do not expect to be declared winners at the end of the day, but we are looking at our message being on the post after election effect, where the young people and the people of the country are going to rise up and demand for that is made to be theirs, for their right, and as well demand for their vote, so that at the end of the day, he who wins can be declared. So we are looking at reaching out more into the international community as well to participate in the next coming election. Previously, we did not have election observers from all over the world. The regime actually did not allow and accept and acknowledge those that are submitted to participate in these elections. But this time around, we are looking at measuring on domestic civil societies and organizations that can observe and register in to participate so that we can have a free and fair election. The coming in of the Right Honorable Kyagulanyi Ssentamu Bobi Wine, who was in the music industry and attracted so many young people, not only because he was a musician, but because of his messages in all throughout the music he sang. He sang about the common people, the health structures in the country, the economy. He sang about issues that affect the common people. And we are basing on that. We are literally just emphasizing and preaching more of a better society, preaching more of a rule of law, preaching more of leaders that account to the people, calling on and advocating for the civil society to be more aggressive when it comes up on situations when it comes to voter education, so that the people can fully know their rights and as well come up to back up and defend their vote this time around.
Thank you so much, Derek. I think you mentioned your slogan, "The people power, our power." And I wanted to just ask a question that centers a lot around what the potential risk that citizens can get frustrated as authoritarian regimes prevent political change. Like, how do you begin to prevent political apathy when the people that you're consistently reminding that they have the power to prevent change, but they're not seeing the change that maybe they are wanting to see? How do you deal with that in order to sustain the interest of the people, the support of the people, and the power that the people hold to get you as a party to where you are trying to go?
Well, we are trying as much as possible to reflect our leadership and sorry about that. We are trying as much as possible to reflect a true leadership, servant leadership, so that people can, those that had lost hope totally in leaders of our country, can regain and trust leaders in their country, or leaders in the opposition, or leaders or in the alternative that are liberal and are like-minded, to find that they can gain confidence in these leaders, so that they can uphold them, to see that their struggle and the economic struggle at the end of the day is successful. But like I told you, the coming in of Bobi Wine gave in new hope to so many young people to get involved in the politics of the country. And trust me, currently today, almost literally each and everyone is concerned over the daily management of their country. They will comment on the corruption that is going around. They will demand for roads, even when they are not allowed on the streets. We have more participation on Twitter Spaces, on Facebook, or the common people demanding for a better leadership and governance from their leaders, which has attracted so many people all over the world. And we are looking as well to tap into the diaspora, which has been very much activated this time around because of the connection and of social media. But like I told you previously, we are not looking at being declared by the Electoral Commission at the end of the day. We are looking at the post after election, and we want to use this time around the time being given to us to reach out during this election period, to preach and strengthen our people when it comes to elections, and to see how possibly peacefully we can achieve this as a country without doing what General Museveni did 38 years back.
Thank you so much for that. And I actually like the fact that you're emphasizing the fact that citizens are continuing to engage. And I think that's the emphasis that was given by earlier speakers, that elections are not the day where you vote for a president. There is so much more involved, and it's good to see that you're investing in ensuring that citizens continue to engage with the different levels of political participation. So Chipo, I want to bring you into this conversation because President Hichilema did not win his first election. He actually lost his first few contests, but then strengthened his political alliances and his campaign team. How did he adapt over time to become a more successful candidate?
Thank you, Matante, for that question. Just before I get into those details, I'd like to share a bit of context on Zambia that might be of interest. So President Hichilema had actually been running for 23 years before he won any election. He's the 7th president of the Republic of Zambia, and we've had at least 4 different political parties, which would give an impression or would make it seem that he would have had it easy, since Zambia is one of the countries that we look at on the continent as a leading democracy, or one that has hope to consolidate its democratic credentials. However, it wasn't that easy. President Hichilema went through so much violence and resistance. And he obviously had to demonstrate resistance, resilience, and persistence in order to win, considering that he had been running for 3 years and had done 5 elections before he could win any election. And in order to achieve this, I think a few things changed over time. So refining the messaging and the narrative and being consistent on it to the extent that people became familiar with it year in, year out was something that was key. Alliances were also very critical, and these alliances were not only with the international community, as I've heard my colleague from Uganda saying, there were also very much partnerships that were domestic, and these were not just to get bigger numbers, to vote, but actually to get the electorate to be able to see themselves within the party. So to see themselves through President Hichilema and the party. So one of the things he faced was that he was constantly accused for being a party president that only represented a certain region of the country. And he ended up, building alliances and coalitions with other prominent individuals and leaders from different parts of the country in different regions that showed more representation, even if they didn't come with significant followers. So people could say, if he was accused then of being tribal, he was able to rebut this by demonstrating how inclusive he was. So I think it's very important also to address the challenge, the negative perceptions that the electorate could have on a political party or political candidate, to basically increase your chances of carrying the day. Other than that, there was also an element of strengthening the campaign team and campaign strategy. So the campaign team was very diverse, a lot more young people, the likes of myself and others, who actually helped build his social media campaign. And this was very innovative, that by the time that we were going to the election in 2021 during COVID, whilst all other political parties, including the incumbent at the time, had been saying there's no way a political party that's on social media could win an election. But by the time COVID came, everyone couldn't, campaign as they know campaigns to be. You couldn't actually go out there and do mass rallies because it was not responsible and safe for people to gather. But because we had honed in the skill of using social media, it was very easy to get a gathering on social media and get numbers every time his page went live, or he would do a roadshow in his car, but that was live, so those specific elements also show the use of social media and its strengths, to basically help the president win the election. And to this day, his page is one of it's got one of the highest followers on social media in Zambia. The other aspect that we saw also on social media is engaging the youth, which we've all spoken to. A lot of people have mentioned how influential the youth vote can be. Was that the youth quickly made a pseudonym for him that sort of disengaged the persona that had been created about him of what type of candidate he was, and all the negative propaganda that the incumbent party had created then by calling him Bali, which means like a cool dad or a fatherly figure. And that went viral very quickly, became a hashtag that we even all forgot his actual name. And it was almost like they were dealing with a new person altogether. But I mentioned that because just to show that even if you've been running for so long, you still have to bring in like innovative ways of engaging the electorate. And this is what we used on social media. And even now, 2.5 years in office, you hear you know, people shouting when they see his motorcade driving past, saying Bali, or commenting on his social media pages as Bali, when all these years we had called him Hakainde Hichilema or HH. So he has a new nickname which went viral. But most importantly also is voter protection. So we were very strategic about this. Protecting the vote was in several layers. So not just having agents from the party, but also having alliances and coalitions with the civil society and NGOs. You know, so you basically had 3 layers in polling stations. So whereas they just thought you had one polling agent, even the people who were objectively there just watching the vote, you were relying on them to basically report to a central parallel voter tabulation center. So you then use technology, you know, to be able to get the results in, you know, in real time, and also take an image. So we all had these apps that, you know, you could actually report in what is happening at your polling station, if there was violence, if there was something unusual, but immediately the count of the vote was done, you could actually take an image, and it would, it was being compiled at a central place, which meant that you were head of the Electoral Commission and even they knew that we were getting the results real time, so they were not going to have any chance to cook up any figures. We could actually challenge all that because we were getting all this information even faster than they were. But in addition to the polling agents, you also had like a layer of security outside. So there were only like 6 or so people allowed inside the polling station as agents, but you had people wanting to protect their votes, staying up at night outside the polling stations and making fires, especially in rural areas, you know, waiting for the polling station or the polling the polling center, you know, to basically stick the final tally outside. And that gave confidence to the polling agents to say that, you know, if the presiding officer or anybody tries to be funny inside the building, I've got backup outside. So the presiding officer would essentially want to do the right thing. So just to share some things that were done differently by Hichilema.
Thank you so much, Chipo, for that insight, and thank you for joining us today. You mentioned a lot of elements there that went into building a successful campaign over many years, but one issue that I really wanted to get your thoughts on, and we have about 2 or 3 minutes before we transition to our colleague Nick. So in the case of Zambia, the lesson for a lot of us seemed pretty clear that when the ruling party performs so poorly on the economy and on job creation, as was the case with the Lungu regime, opposition parties can win. And we heard Aisha talk about this in the context of Senegal, for example, and we all recall the now famous op-ed that President Hichilema wrote last year about this time in Bloomberg, titled "You Cannot Eat Democracy." So he really honed in on this message in the lead up to, during, and after his election. So is that message really that simple? And is the lesson really that simple? And if so, if you could tell us how other opposition leaders can capitalize on these economic realities to produce results at the ballot box.
Jeff, you're making me give ideas to the opposition leaders. But just to take you back to the way I started, that, and it will demonstrate that Zambians actually know the power of their vote, considering that they have had 7 presidents and 4 different political parties. It means that when there is discontent, they know what to do. They speak through the ballot. So you can't underestimate that. However, it's not that simple. I think it's very important as opposition parties to give the electorate a viable alternative. So you just can't say discontent automatically, you know, translates into a change. It's not that easy. So you have to do your part, I think, as an opposition party, which we had to do to make sure that we're viable and we're addressing those gaps which the electorate had with ourselves, and also to protect the vote. So you might even be a viable opposition. There's discontent, they want to change, they vote rightly. There are actually some one or two elections, actually, we say in the UPND that Hichilema actually won, but he didn't carry the day officially. We were told that we were lost, and we petitioned some of these elections, but that didn't change anything. So the vote protection is very, very key and important. That's how you demonstrate actually the delivery of an election. So it's not that automatic, albeit that people more often than not know what's viable and what's good for them, and they do vote correctly. It's how we protect the vote at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. Thank you, Chipo, for those insights, to Aluche, to Derek, and to Aisha, of course. Right now, we're going to pivot to our colleague and our good friend, Nick Cheeseman, to get his thoughts on the discussion so far. As someone who has both studied and been involved in some of the campaigns we've been discussing here today, you are perhaps the perfect person to turn to. And Nick, after providing your feedback, how about we get into some of those questions we received from today's audience? What do you say?
Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. It's been a great discussion, and I'm really glad to be coming after Chipo, who, as ever, is eloquent and powerful, but also raises a number of points that I kind of wanted to try and touch on today. So, I think one of the things that Chipo probably didn't say, because she's close to the president, is that Hichilema did for a while there have a bit of an image problem. He was painted as two things that are very dangerous to be painted as in African politics, as a tribalist and also as somebody who was elite. And one of the things I think the campaign team did really well, using the Bali nickname as she talked about, was essentially kind of humanize the candidate, make people realize that this wasn't necessarily the person they'd been seen depicted in the media, make him look like someone who wasn't out of touch, but was the person you could rely on to help you out, make him look like someone who wanted to reach out to other parts of the country and wasn't just somebody interested in the southern province. And that process of demonstrating that this was a more inclusive candidate, this was a more inclusive campaign, by both changing the image of the candidate, but also by those alliances that Chipo and other people have been talking about, by coalition building and bringing together a broader coalition of different leaders from different parts of the country, that really changed, I think, the way that people saw Hichilema in that election. He became a national statesman, capable of winning power and taking the country with him in a way that perhaps he hadn't always looked like that in the past. So I think there's a lot we can learn from that campaign and about how that campaign was successful. But there's a couple of things that I think people sometimes get wrong about what happened in Zambia and what happened in Senegal and what happened in Gambia and other countries. And one is that, and Chipo's comments bring this out really well, one is that the technology is really important as a part of that. So it was really important in Zambia that they had a great social media campaign. The team, I thought, really got it right in the last election in quite an impressive way. It was smart, it was witty, it was on point, it was up to date. It was, solid. There weren't many big mistakes. It was a very good social media campaign. And as Chipo said, they also used digital technology well to be able to create a parallel vote tabulation so they could tell you that they'd won the election before the Electoral Commission, set out the results. That was all really impressive. But that leads often to a focus on the technology. Right? The idea that technology was doing the heavy lifting. And what was really doing the heavy lifting was really good organization within the party, right? Someone had to enter that data into that app. Somebody had to be pushing out those messages onto social media. And those messages wouldn't have resonated if Hichilema also hadn't at the same time tried to get out physically to make speeches and rallies in other parts of the country, right? You can't just fight a digital campaign. And I think one of the things we don't always think about enough is, planning ahead from year one of losing an election to how do I have a situation at the next election where I can post 2 to 4 people at every single polling station, right? Most countries, 20 to 40,000 polling stations. So automatically you're talking about perhaps 200,000 people that you need to recruit, you need to train, you need to make sure they're loyal, you need to have funds to pay them, you need to have food because they need to be there for 4 or 5 days through the counting of all of the elections. And that process is something that I think UPND did really well in the last election in Zambia and would probably say that they did better than perhaps some of the previous campaigns. In 2016 in Ghana, when I was there, the MPP did the same thing as an opposition party, used the app in a similar way to what we were discussing in Zambia, but it wasn't the app that enabled them to protect the vote. It was the fact that they had 2 people in every single polling station and they had people on bicycles driving around dropping food off so those people could stay in the polling stations. And those people were trained and they were loyal and they submitted the results through the app. So technology is really important, but I think we can't get away from the fact that it's very hard to win an election against an established authoritarian government without a fundamental structure on the ground. That's one thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is that Chipo talked really eloquently there about the value of having an electorate that knows that their vote matters and knows that they can get rid of the president. And Zambians have that because they've done it multiple times. They did it in 1991 when they kicked out Kaunda. They did it in 2011 when they voted in Michael Sada. They did it again most recently, obviously, with Hichilema. So Zambians have that experience. Kenyans now do, to an extent. For example, they had that in 2002 and then most recently voting against the president's favored candidate. Some other countries have that history as well. Malawi has experienced a number of transfers. The really big challenge, and the reason I think, Zimbabwe, Uganda, etc., are different, is that people don't have that memory. There is no popular memory of using the ballot to get rid of the president. Instead, in a country like Uganda, one of the really big challenges is that a lot of people don't believe it's possible to get rid of Museveni via the ballot box. Not because the opposition's done anything wrong, just because they've seen so many elections being manipulated and they've seen Museveni win so many times. So I've got 2 or 3 questions around that I'd like to ask the panel. One is, how do you actually inspire people to believe that their vote counts and they should go to the ballot box when they don't have a lot of experience of actually seeing transfers of power, when they've seen the elections rigged multiple times, and maybe there's a high level of not apathy because people care, but despair about the ability to actually use the vote? So that's the first one. What do you do in countries that don't have that experience of transfers of power like Zambia did to energize people and get them to the polls? The second is that we've talked a little bit about the diaspora today, and I think that's really important. People in the diaspora can often say things that people in the country can't do because they're more protected, they can't be arrested, etc. in the same way. They also can be really important in terms of providing funding and making sure that you actually have access to resources, which are often closed off by authoritarian governments during the election campaign. But what's the most effective way of actually connecting to the diaspora? Do you need to have diaspora representatives as part of your team? And is there a risk that you become too beholden to the diaspora and you actually then are seen to be out of touch with people on the ground in the country concerned? What's the balance between diaspora support and supporting the country? And the final thing, that I'd like to get people's sense on is the relationship to the international community. So we've talked a little bit here about the role that donors can play, and obviously one of the things that we often see around elections in international election observers. But we also see right now in Africa a moment where being connected to international observers and international donors is very dangerous. We see the wave of anti-France protests across West Africa. We see the ability of leaders in countries like Uganda and Zimbabwe to play on the kind of colonial card or the sovereign card as a way of trying to delegitimize opposition parties. And therefore, we know that there is a risk of being seen to be too close to the international community. And even though that might be a perfectly legitimate thing to do, it's something that can be exploited by authoritarians. So how do you find ways to actually, harness the support of the international community without opening yourself up to being targeted as pawns of the international community? So those are my thoughts and some questions. I'm not going to target those questions at anyone particularly because I think they're sort of equally relevant to everyone. But I'd be particularly interested, for example, in talking about Uganda and other countries that haven't experienced that positive change Zambia has in terms of, how can we actually generate that idea that it is possible to do this via the ballot box? And is that partly perhaps about learning lessons from other countries and being able to disseminate those on social media? Is that what we need to start doing? Actually building the morale of people around the idea that change is possible by sharing these examples, which is, of course, one of the reasons why we have this show. So yeah, I'm going to start talking for too long, so I'm going to shut up, push it back to the panelists, and look forward to hearing their responses.
Thanks so much, Nick. Aisha, maybe we can start with you since you kicked off today's discussion. And you talked specifically about the role of the diaspora and how important that was, particularly in the Gambian context. So maybe you could address some of that.
Okay, Nick's points are very relevant when it comes to international cooperation because we are, in a different situation. Things are changing, and the what most African countries are looking for right now, it's equal partnership, a win-win cooperation. So when, for instance, I'll give an example. For the Gambia, it was a completely different context, and I'll give a more recent one, which is that of Senegal. When the Senegalese actually went through the lodge a complaint before the ICC, for instance, it was to document human rights violations. And these corporations actually are more focused on human rights violation issues. When the coalition of civil society organizations, political parties, trade unions, etc., all groupings I was part of, we are still part of as an organization, which is Force Vive 24, which, was the last one, last major group actually before the Arsunu election came up. We, the leaders actually went around to all embassies, be it mostly Western embassies, but there were also some African embassies, to brief them on the human rights violations that were happening in the country. So here, what was different actually is these are, information sharing sessions, not necessarily to strike deals that we will be working with you or giving you economic contracts once the opposition come to power. And also it requires a kind of, for the political parties and their sympathizers, it requires a level of understanding of the party's ideology, or what the parties actually are looking for. This was not a concern for many who were standing against the then incumbent, because everyone agreed that actually those who were in the opposition, and specifically the biggest opposition then, who are now in power, they are in for a win-win cooperation. What the political party wants to do in terms of international relations has to be clear to everyone. Of course, there is the ideas or the wishes you have, and there are the realities of coming to power, and then you realize that certain things you can't do or you can't just get out of. So that actually was not a major concern. Actually, I didn't see reaction when people were, talking to foreign governments or foreign embassies, especially Western, to brief them. And another thing also is these, towards the latter days of the last months of the Macky Sall regime, you could see, officials from French Quai d'Orsay, that's the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, reaching out to the opposition leaders just to discuss and, get information from them. And you could also see that the US Embassy received a representative of the main political party then. What I want to point out here is it should be clear what kind of relationship and why this is being done, to avoid any kind of backlash or misunderstanding. Because that was the ground for here in Senegal. And when things got really bad, that was from February 3rd, people kept on informing the world, but everyone knew there's one thing: this is our fight, and we are the only ones who can save ourselves. We are not expecting a savior to come from somewhere else to do it for us. So that's the lesson learned from Senegal, which, it's more recent with the current realities of, the where international cooperation is decried by most people.
Very important points. Thank you, Aisha. Aluche and Derek, we haven't heard from you in a while, so I wanted to give you the opportunity to come back in here and respond to some of those comments from Nick and Aisha, and to respond to some of the questions as well. So Aluche, maybe you first, give you an opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I listened to what Nick said, and he basically summarized exactly what's currently happening all these countries, even in Nigeria. I think, he asked, one of the questions I really want to get into is diaspora mobilization. Peter Obi did that very much. I think that was one of his focus during the campaign. He traveled to a lot of countries overseas. He met with diasporans, assured them that, basically encouraged them to come back to Nigeria and invest. Professionals can practice in Nigeria. He was giving them hope, letting them know that Nigeria will be safe. Under his leadership, Nigeria will be conducive for business, for professional practice, and pretty much everything that these people are already enjoying in the countries that they currently live in. He also, spoke to them about coming back to Nigeria to, not even just coming back, but sending their money to Nigeria so that it can help with the economy, because Obi is more interested in, fixing the economy, fighting corruption, and a whole lot of things. So on that aspect, a lot of work was done, but of course, it's not enough. It's difficult to unite against incumbency, especially in a country like Nigeria with different ethnicity, different social class, different religion, because that also played a huge role in the country. So in as much as Obi mobilized a lot of youths, Obi reached out to a lot of people, there were still some obstructions here and there. And that kind of gave the incumbency more power to, basically overcome or take over the country the way they wanted to. Another point I wanted to touch on is he asked about, how people can protect their votes, because voting is one thing, but also ensuring that your vote is protected is another thing. And we also saw this in the 2023 presidential election. A lot of Nigerians who voted sat at polling units, reported live, and of course, technology played a huge role as well. With the use of their smartphones, they were able to take photographs of the ballots. They were able to post it on social media. They were able to alert the public of what's going on, any discrepancies they saw. After all that, I guess the bridge that a lot of people could not cross is how do they ensure that their votes are protected? I mean, they could see very well that they are winning, but then the Electoral Commission's platform, IREV, where these results were supposed to be tabulated, was not showing up, right? All of a sudden, they said there was a glitch and the results were not uploaded accordingly in real time, like they promised. So that alone threw people a lot of people off balance. And that was one of the reasons, and that was part of the reasons why Peter Obi went to court to contest the result, because before him and before every Nigerian, his votes were stolen and credited to someone else, right? So how can we ensure that what happened in 2023 is not going to repeat itself again? We just have to keep doing more work, continue to engage everyone, and also ensure that the Electoral Commission, like I stated earlier, the Electoral Commission needs a reform, the judiciary needs a reform, because some of the guiding laws are already there in the Constitution, but are they following it? And what should the people do if they're not following it? And also, one important part that I've always wanted to say to a larger populace is we need to get into the habit of protesting, right? It's important to express your dissatisfaction when something is not happening the way it should. And that's the missing puzzle in all that happened in Nigeria. The fact that the people could not get themselves out to protest. And of course, they did not want to be labeled criminals. They did not want to be attacked. They did not want to be hurt by the ruling class, who of course were ready to do all that if they hit the streets. So there is still some restrictions there whereby people cannot express themselves fully. But I personally believe that it will go a long way to ensure that votes count, right? If the results are not reflecting the way they should, the people should be able to demand for it and insist that happens. And we saw that play out in President Faye's election. The youth took to the streets, they insisted that their votes must count. And that's really what Nigeria should be doing going forward. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Oluche, very much. And Derek, maybe transitioning to you here, we've heard a lot about the critical importance of defending and protecting the vote. And we heard how Chipo and her colleagues were able to successfully do this in Zambia, for example, and you as an elected member of parliament in Uganda, to a certain extent, you've been able to do that as well. So how have you managed to do that, and what are your plans going forward? Because as we know, there are elections coming up very quickly in Uganda once again in 2026. So what are your thoughts on all of this to maybe close us out?
Well, Smooth, Nick raised an issue of Uganda, which has spent more than 40 years with one leader, but as well, which has never had a peaceful transition of power. It has always been the order of the day to be violent and guns that bring in leaders in our country. Well, and many of us do believe that our votes can count, and many of us do believe that we can have a peaceful transition, and that is why we opt for elections, and that is why we continue shooting at going for elections and sensitizing our people into getting involved into choosing their leaders who they can account at the end, who can be accountable at the end of the day. But as well, I want to inform him that me personally, you raised something. Me personally, I was arrested 16 times in just a period of 2 months in a bid of stopping the organization of making sure that we do not arrange probably or have polling agents at all polling stations. But this was happening all over the country. Why would we say that we do not believe in being declared as winners? It is because of the circumstances that we go through to be declared winners, because of the situation at which government tries to create by using all agencies of government to make sure that the incumbent General Museveni is declared winner at the end of the day. Well, what we are doing right now is countrywide mobilization, whereby we are basing it on the grassroots mobilization, empowering the people on knowing their rights and knowing how to participate and rise up at the end of the day. Like one of my colleagues mentioned, it's not a one-day process. And we believe in this time when we are free to go out there and talk to our communities and convince our communities and educate them more and probably campaign. It is the right time for us to make sure that during this election time, they can boost their guts up to rise up and defend their vote. Well, I must tell you that what I went through as a person, even to be declared as a member of parliament, it is not what I would like any other leader to go through, because at the end of the day, it comes with consequences after. And many of these other leaders, we came in a very short time. I personally, I was part of the leaders in the current government, but coming closer to elections and to the age limit and knowing what is going on in government, the corruption, the nepotism, and the unequal distribution of government resources and the leadership, the abuse of human rights, I could not stand it anymore. So I went on to join the opposition and to see that we sensitize the community. But I want to mention this. On several occasions, the opposition, like in 2021, we won elections, but the circumstances whereby many of our agents were arrested. The internet was blocked, and many of our agents, even up to now, and mobilizers are still in military courts, and many of them are still nowhere to be seen. They disappeared till today. But we are looking at more of sensitizing our communities, our people, our voters, to make sure they stand up, demand for their vote, so that their vote can count. We strongly believe in elections, and we strongly believe this time round we are going to be in position to make sure that Ugandans get to see the fruits of democracy.
Thanks so much. Yeah, and one of the things I think that we all need to do, not beyond, I'm talking about not the activists in the room, but the academics, the researchers, the journalists, is to be much clearer on a more regular basis about the levels of violence that happened in Uganda and the simple fact that it's not possible to have a credible election under those conditions, right? And I think there's been a slippage recently where there's a lack of calling that out globally, the level of violence we saw at times recently in places like Zimbabwe as well. And if we stop calling it out and we stop pointing out that credible elections cannot take place under those conditions, then we let everybody down, right? Because there's almost a situation right now where, you know, the Ugandan election, which was an awful election in many, many ways, a horrendous election in terms of the level of violence, was not condemned globally in the way that I think it would have been condemned in the 1990s. And that has to be part of the conversation as well. Coming to you, Chipo, if that's okay, for the very final word. One of the things that I think we might also want to talk about very briefly, we've only got a few minutes, but to touch on is, you know, what opposition leaders should do after they've won to help other opposition leaders. And I'm pushing this to you because I know that President Hichilema broke new ground during his inauguration by actually inviting other regional opposition leaders to his inauguration rather than just inviting other presidents. And that was seen by many, I think, as an act of solidarity and a demonstration that he hadn't forgotten that he too had been recently an opposition leader. But I just wanted to reflect on the challenges, because of course, if you go around the region supporting opposition leaders, you're going to have bad relations with regional governments. On the other hand, you want to recognize that solidarity and those friendships that you built up during the time when you were in opposition. So maybe one of the things that would be interesting just to end on is what actually have the opposition leaders that have won power done, and how do you think about that particular challenge, which Hichilema obviously embraced with that decision around the inauguration. So over to you to the final word, and then we'll be wrapping up with Jeffrey and Mantade.
I was actually hoping to talk a little bit about this when you were asking, you know, whether change is possible. Change is possible, but change also needs to deliver. You know, democracy needs to deliver. And I think we may have seemingly graduated, but actually the hard work starts now. And that's what, you know, we are grappling with at the moment, to deliver on the promises that we made to the people of Zambia. And this has its own challenges. So yes, you then have the political calendar to also keep, you know, in your purview, knowing that you're going to go back to an election soon. But in between that, you would have to deliver and make things happen. And some of the challenges that we are currently experiencing are that there's a lot of things that you inherit, you know, so you inherit like the debt burden, you inherit a team. So whilst we worked on a team, we had a common purpose, a vision, we understood the manifesto. The president has also had to inherit 400,000 civil servants, which, you know, are huge. They are his team now, and he's relying on them to deliver. But that message, you know, of change, that he was elected on the premise of reform, and he's here to disrupt even that which works to make it work even better. So if it was good, now it has to become excellent. It's very difficult right now to get right. And we get misunderstood a lot because we don't have time. We told people we would do things a certain way and we have to get them done. So I think it's important that even when political parties are in opposition, to think about the day after the election a bit more and plan more in terms of how delivery will be done, because that's what you know, the people would want to see. Colleague from Uganda was saying that you know, that's more important, you know, for people to claim what is right for them, you know. So that's what we have to respond to now, you know, to make sure that delivery is done. And so even when, you know, President Hichilema is able to succeed on the delivery side of things beyond the election, it should inspire and demonstrate to other electorates and other parties across the continent, you know, of what democracy can actually result into, what resilience, persistence, and consistency can actually turn into. So we are trying to, you know, keep the momentum going and make sure that we deliver now that we have the mandate from the people of Zambia.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Chipo. That's a great note to end on, right? We always try and end on something which is a bit more positive. And yes, that challenge of how do you deliver, especially in conditions like yours with serious economic inherited legacies, is a really important one. Maybe that's a topic for a future show, Jeff. So back to Jeff and Mantali to wrap up. Thanks to the brilliant panelists for those great answers. And over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Nick. This entire conversation has been very insightful, and we could go on, but we're unfortunately out of time. So thanks so much for everyone that has joined us today. We encourage you to post your reflections and your thoughts on our social media platforms, especially on Twitter, to carry on this conversation, to inject new ideas, and to, of course, inform new future conversations. As always, a well-deserved shout out to today's panel. We appreciate all of you, and going forward, our team looks forward to keeping in touch with all of you and to highlighting the important work that you will no doubt continue to do. Definitely stay in touch with us by visiting our website, www.theresistancebureau.com, and by subscribing on our homepage to receive all our important updates. So on our website, you can also revisit all of our past shows, including this one, because we're recording it. They are saved in this episode section on the website, and please do check out our Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube accounts. So we've got all the bases covered. Just go where you spend most of your time. As a final note, the continued impact of the Resistance Bureau is a testament to the efforts of the entire team. In particular, thanks to our tech lead, Peter Dory, and our creative advisor, Antonio Msaga, who work behind the scenes to make this show such a vibrant and successful one. And to our growing audience, thank you so much for joining us today. In the meantime, take good care, and we will see you next time. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.